talk about insulation.
It's a good time to do insulation when you do your siding, because you'll never be that close to the insulation cavity, like
right.
where the insulation is supposed to go until you get that siding off. Otherwise, you have to do it from the inside, or you have to drill holes in your walls, whether that's from the interior or the exterior, and there's all kinds of ways to insulate.
Oh, I don't want to go down a wormhole, but we should talk about where insulation goes. The best spot for it is in between the walls, inside your stud framing, not on the outside. People always want us to put some insulation on the outside
before we put the siding on.
Yes, and there is potentially a problem with that. So, in order to put a thick insulation barrier on the outside of your walls to give you the highest R factor of, like, say 7, you're going to have to put in a 2-inch foam board insulation of some type.
And now you've traded one problem for another.
And now you've potentially traded one problem for another, the biggest problem of which is you've caused the exterior of your wall to grow, which now changes your window projections, the projection of the wall, the projection of the wall facet.
And it didn't increase your square footage of your house.
It didn't. It didn't.
That's a loss.
Yeah, and so you have to put in intermediate framing so that you have something to nail to when you put your cladding up. So we kind of try to stay away from that. If you want to do insulation, we'd like to put it where it goes, which is inside the walls.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of different methods. So you could do, well, you take it.
Well, yeah. I was going to say before we moved on, when you do that exterior insulation, like what we have done in the past is that maybe a 1/2 inch, foam board insulation on the outside of your sheathing. And, I tell my clients a lot that the return on that investment is so far down the road, you'll probably never see
minimal or negligible, because you just have the tiniest little gain in R value. Maybe a 3.
Right. Maybe.
R3 max.
Yep. Yeah. So, but that is, that's a question. I think that's what a lot of our, competition is offering that too. And that's just, it might be worth it if you've got pipes in an exterior wall. Yeah. There are other directions we can still go that we'll talk about here in a second. But that there can be certain applications where any kind of insulation would be better than nothing. Yeah. In certain cases that might revolve around plumbing, or if you've just got a very exposed room in the house.
Or if you have walls that just don't have insulation in them. But
at that point, then let's insulate those walls and get the sheathing off. Let's get down to your studs. There's a bay between each of your studs that's 14.5 inches wide. 16
inches on center.
Yep. And in that bay is where you want your insulation, whether that's fiberglass insulation, whether that's a closed foam insulation that's sprayed in and it expands. And so
you got 3 basic types. So you're going to have your bat insulation, which is that fiberglass rolls that you just put right inside that framing cavity. The next thing that you might do is cellulose fibers, right? Cellulose insulation, like you see up in your attic, and that's a blown-in product. You could keep your existing sheathing, and we just drill holes at the top of the wall and sort of at the midpoint of the wall in case you have any blocking in between, because sometimes you're going to have fire blocking or structural support in between. So then we can get the top cavity and the bottom portion. Or then if you're going to have all of your sheathing off, or you don't have any sheathing, or we're replacing your sheathing because you have a non-structural sheathing on your house. And by sheathing, that's typically what people frequently refer to as like OSB or plywood sheathing. If we're replacing all of that, now you have access to the full wall cavity, and you could do closed cell spray foam. Not open cell. Open cell is like the great stuff that has this wild expansion and it places a lot of pressure on your framing. You don't want to do that. It'll cause things to warp and it'll knock your drywall out of shape. Closed cell low expansion foam, you can spray that in those cavities. Now, return on investment, again, the cost on that foam insulation, unless you just desperately need it and you're dealing with Arctic temperatures all the time, probably gonna get the most cost-efficient performance out of just putting vats in those walls and filling that full wall cavity up to make sure that you don't have any points of air infiltration. That's my personal.
I think that's exactly right. Here in the Front Range, along the I-25 corridor, I think that's sufficient for the temperature fluctuation that we get throughout the year. Now, if you're up in the foothills and you have an older home that's just super cold in the winter, and typically I find that these clients know exactly how many cords of firewood they go through every winter. And if that's you, then some sort of closed cell spray-in foam insulation is going to be the best option.
I think the thing to remember though is in order to gain access, that means we're taking the sheathing off of your walls.
So your price goes up.
But
your house is gonna thank you. I mean, it's that sheathing that you're gonna have now, along with the new moisture barrier and the whole system that's coming through that is gonna be great.